The theme for today's forum is protecting environmental and agricultural assets from feral pig impacts. We've got 4 speakers today to go through that. And our first speaker is Damien Burrows from James Cook Uni. Damien's also the co-hub leader of the National Environmental Science Program's Marine and Coastal Hub. And the hub is developing a new project on feral pig management to protect coastal habitats. So Damien, across to you.
Thanks, John. Just as John said, today we're not talking about the results of a project. We haven't finished the project. We're just starting and launching this project. It is funded. It is happening. So we're just presenting to you today on what we're doing and get some feedback, and maybe some people might want to get involved and things like that. So and I've got Sheriden Morris on the line, who's also manages the hub with myself. So Sheriden will probably talk a bit later on. Next slide. I'll just introduce what the National Environmental Science Program is quickly for those who may not have heard of it. It is funded through the Federal Department of Environment to do environmental research. There are 4 hubs there. It's a $149 million program divided between those 4 hubs. Cher and I co-manage the Marine and Coastal Hub. There's a website there. There is, of course, the Resilient Landscapes Hub, which is effectively a terrestrial hub, and it's the terrestrial equivalent of the Marine and Coastal Hub. There's a Climate Systems Hub, which I think is fairly self-evident, and a Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub, which is more of an urban type hub. So they're the 4 hubs that make up the program, and we're representing the Marine and Coastal Hub. Next slide. So within the Marine and Coastal Hub, there are 2 nodes, a sort of a southern node for the southern half of Australia and the northern node for the northern half of Australia. So Cher and I manage the northern node, and we deal with all the projects across Northern Australia, of which this one is one of those projects. Next slide. So within the hub's life is from 2021 till December 26. We do have some administrative work after that, but that's when the project finished in December 26. It is a defined period program. We've had a range of 81 projects commissioned thus far, totaling $26 million in cash. And we do leverage 15% cash from our research partners and 85% in kind as well. So there's an equivalent in kind cash investment from the partners, but the NESP cash that we put on the table so far is $26 million across those 81 projects. You know, across all of Australia, there's a really broad remit. You know, any topic. The hubs aren't limited by topic. We can do any topic at all in the marine and coastal environment. So that's a huge potential agenda we have. Yet we've ended up so far, and I'll talk about these projects in the next slide, but $2.5 million of our cash has been spent on pig management and projects related to pig management in the broader definition of that. So for a marine hub, with all the issues we have ended up with a fairly significant investment on pigs, and I'll talk about how we got to that in the next slide. So it's a major outcome area for our hub, a significant area of investment. It's not what a lot of our marine partners in the hub would have thought we would have been spending our money on. They were thinking of dolphins and seagrasses and coral reefs and things like that. But there's been a real need from our stakeholders to do work on pigs, which I'm sure is no surprise to people in this room, but it is a bit sometimes to a lot of the marine people involved in our hub. NESP funding is great because I really like about it. One of the things I really like about it is it's quite flexible. Projects we don't put an ad in the paper and call for proposals. We actually broker projects with people, so you can get very deliberatively get the outcomes you're after and the kind of project you want by negotiating the development of the projects. And that also means that we can, if need be, we're flexible enough to change course where need be and change our approaches or location. So there's a fair bit of flexibility in the program, which makes it great. Next slide. So these are our investments so far, and some of them are around pig control, which we'll talk about in the later slides. Some are the ancillary things that go with pig control, such as carbon abatement and things like that. And some of them are also some scoping studies, which actually led us to invest in pig control. So I'll just talk through, these are projects either already completed or currently underway. So the first project was a scoping study with Indigenous groups. That Indigenous people in Northern Australia, tell us, what are your priorities? And they came back to us and said the high priorities were, this isn't the full list, but there was a list, but these were among them was, we want to work on country. We want Indigenous people working on country. We want to protect our turtles. We're really worried about what's happening with the nesting and the pig predation there, and we want to do pig control. So there's a strong signal from the Indigenous communities about what they wanted to see happen with our NESP funding. And at the same time, the next project, we had another scoping project looking at what are the key habitat restoration needs for Australia. And one of the major outcomes there was the inclusion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in restoration nature-based solutions. At the same time, the government agencies were managing things like turtles, were telling to us that pig control is an important thing for them in terms of protecting turtles at the nesting beaches, and they saw some real benefits of doing that research there. So a range of stakeholders were telling us that they felt that pig control research would be really beneficial for coastal and marine issues and species. At the same time, the government's looking to introduce some carbon, potentially pig control, ungulate control more broadly. There's a potential that it would be a official carbon credit mechanism. And they told us in order to develop that as a mechanism, they would have to have some data on how much carbon is released or saved through pig control or ungulate control. And they needed that data desperately to support the development of a methodology. So we funded some work looking at carbon release from disturbed soils. And so there's work going on with fenced and unfenced areas and areas that have been shot out or not shot out for pigs and cattle and other ungulates as well. So there's a variety of sites across Australia where we're looking at the carbon benefit of feral pig and cattle control. And that would give some carbon estimates of the amount of carbon that could be saved through if a carbon mechanism was developed for pig control. At the same time, if Indigenous groups are going to be involved in pig control, we need to know what are the logistics and are these groups, do they have the capability across the broad spectrum of geographic areas of doing control? So Justin Perry has led a project looking at the logistics and what is required, the capability and capacity of groups to actually undertake pig control in remote areas in Northern Australia. Are we prepared? That project's going on at the moment. At the same time, there are, besides the official carbon market mechanism for potential pig control, which I just mentioned, there's an informal market, a voluntary market, where philanthropists and corporates and NGOs might want to invest in pig control without necessarily getting carbon credits for it. They might just want to do it for ecosystem services, markets, things like that, just out of corporate well-being, corporate promotions, whatever their motivations. But there's a market there in that voluntary market. But we want to make sure the Indigenous groups can participate in that market. They're the ones who are going to be doing a lot of control, especially in Northern Australia. So we've got a project to make sure that they can adequately participate in any markets that might come around, environmental markets, biodiversity markets, and also that any of those other corporate providers in those markets know how to more respectfully and appropriately engage with Indigenous people. So that's an ongoing project as well. So that's, you can see there's a few sort of ancillary projects that don't actually directly involve the culling of pigs, but they're very important to get these other projects in place so that more holistically pig control can be funded, Indigenous people can get jobs on it long term. So there's a much bigger picture around pig control that we're trying to fund as well. The bottom one there was defining metrics. That was actually funded in the previous NESP, but they demonstrated they can have a 90% reduction in turtle egg predation along 48 kilometres of Cape York beaches. So again, there has been a demonstration that pig control can be quite beneficial. So that was funded through NESP projects as well. So next slide. So that's the other projects. Now I'm coming to the one I really want to focus on today, is the one that's actually focusing on some pig control. And this is developing integrated pest management for feral pigs, led by Justin Perry, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. Justin's with NALSMA, the Northern Australian Indigenous Land Sea Management Alliance. And so that's the cash investment. There's, and the Feral Pig Action Plan has put some cash in as well to that. So grateful for that participation, and about the same amount in kind as well. So the genesis of this is that there are lots of pig control programs, lots of different funding programs, lots of different on-ground operators. It makes it a bit difficult sometimes to get integration and the demonstration of benefit. A lot of programs don't have research attached to them. We're the opposite end. We've got a research program, but not on-ground. We don't fund on-ground control. So it makes sense for a research project to marry with some on-ground control projects to put their resources together to see what they can do. Often the pest control programs, a lot of it is population reduction activities, a focus on how efficient the culling methods are. There's not always an opportunity to investigate the benefit to the environmental assets they're trying to protect, whether it be the wetlands, the water quality, the vegetation, or the turtles. So as a marine hub and environmental hub, we're going to be focused on looking at those environmental assets and what level of control relates to what level of environmental protection, with a focus particularly on coastal wetlands and turtle nests. So we can demonstrate how all this works. We can quantify the benefits, the benefits to the environment of pig control. That's going to be a big focus we want to achieve in this program, and developing the integrated pest management and basically bridging that gap between on-ground management and research. So next slide. So obviously there's several phases, and I'll talk about the phases in a moment. We want to look at lot of ecological studies on the spatial temporal movements of pigs, the preferred habitat uses, the site fidelity, the connectivity, things, a lot of that basic ecology stuff we need for the integrated pest management. We obviously want to look at the values that we're trying to protect and what level of control leads to what level of protection in those environmental values. We want to test management strategies at a variety of scales, starting with local scale, but examining how we can scale up to regional scale control. And we want to look integrating all that into a decision support tool, which is very useful for getting that automatic feedback you need when you're doing on-ground control programs. And obviously they'll need to be scaling up. We're going to have to engage with a broad range of stakeholders and end users about the benefit of this. We're looking at least 3 case study sites where control actions have a fair degree of flexibility, because we do need a fair degree of flexibility in order to conduct the adaptive research. And we've got a short list of case study sites that we're considering at the moment. And while it's focused on the coastal and marine environment, the learning should be highly transferable to the terrestrial environment. We will be doing control activities, kilometers away from the coastal environment anyway, so effectively in terrestrial environments that adjoin those coastal areas. So very high transferability to terrestrial environments. Next slide. So your phase 1 planning we're in at the moment. We've had some workshops recently with a large number of stakeholders from Northern Australia. We've got a short list of case studies. I haven't announced the final choice yet. We have a short list. We're doing a lot of background activity. Justin's been going to a lot of meetings. I'm sure many people on this have met with him already in discussing this. So we're looking at the existing data and planning what we're doing at the moment. And that's finishing shortly. Next slide. And we'll announce the case study sites, which we're in discussion at the moment with a short list, looking at the flexibility and what can be achieved there, and the transferability of learnings from those case study sites. They'll obviously start building spatio-temporal models, and we'll need to develop really good assessments of population using a variety of methods, aerial methods, on-ground camera arrays, things like that, to get a good handle on the populations of pigs in those areas and in the adjoining control areas as well, where we won't, control in a scientific sense, where we won't be doing pig control, the experimental control areas, as well as the active population reduction areas. Next slide. So after the population assessment, we'll also be monitoring of the environmental assets that we want to protect, so we know what our baseline is for those environmental assets, so we can measure the benefit to those. That'll start happening this year as well. And then next slide. And the next phase, we actually go into the control using a variety of control methods that will be utilized in the actual management of the phase. And then the final slide. So the ultimate goal is to develop a workable integrated pest management framework agreed to by a wide range of stakeholders. And we acknowledge we're not going to solve it all in this project, but at least make a decent start on it. It'll need further development. If we can make a decent start on it, we can develop that investment. And I think the investment will flow into developing that further to really nail it. So we've done this before in crown and thorn starfish, a very different environment in the marine environment. We did it in the previous NESP. The crown and thorn starfish eat coral. They, very devastating, have serious effects on the Great Barrier Reef. They're the major cause of coral loss on the Great Barrier Reef. There was $2 million a year being invested in control, so a reasonable amount of money being invested, but it wasn't really going in or achieving anything notable. But we put in 5 years in NESP research, working with the control operators on the ground very closely. And after that 5 years, we had an integrated regional control program that all the management agencies and all the control agents all agreed to work on the same coordinated program. We're able to quantify how much coral was saved per dollar spent. It was no longer about how many starfish were killed. It was about how much coral was saved per dollar invested in the control program. And with that as a business case, we're able to go to the federal government and say, we've got a coordinated program here. We can quantify the benefit to the environment. We can actually tell you how much bang you're getting for your buck. And with that, they invested into a $161 million coordinated 10-year control program, which is now ongoing. And obviously that has further refinements happening in that program, a lot more research going on. But being able to do that initial research really released that coordinated investment program. And so that's, I think pigs will be a lot harder. No illusions, it'd be a lot harder than that. But nonetheless, that's sort of the philosophy that we worked on based on that experience. The next slide, and I might throw to Sheriden if she wants to say anything more about that IPM framework.
Thanks, Damien. Can you hear me, you guys? Yes? Yep, good.
Yes.
Just quickly, Damien covered most of it, but just quickly, integrated pest management is actually an economic algorithm. It's about how big a control or what you can do to protect the asset that you want to protect for the amount of resources that you have available. So it shifts it's very different to, oh, there's pigs, let's go and kill them. And it needs a lot of data. It's a data hungry algorithm that you need. So our biggest ask is to actually access that data to actually start building it. Now, it will vary from region to region. Particularly you'll have your wet tropics, you'll have your dry tropics agendas, you'll have out in savanna country. So it's going to vary. However, the basic principles around the set algorithm are really good. And that gives us a decision support and process. And while that sounds really boring, the reality is it actually allows you to do a fairly serious coordinated control program. Now, the crown of thorns starfish didn't have that for years, and they were pumping money into it, but they weren't getting a whole of system, or at least at a regional scale, control. And one thing that we've argued and argued pretty successfully is that in the face of climate change, the most effective thing you can do outside of mitigation, of course, is actually relieve pressure. And on our environmental, on our ecosystems and our important ecosystems, pigs apply a lot of pressure. I will say we do have to do this, and we do have to get this argument together pretty quickly. When you talk down in Canberra and talk to a lot of the decision makers, whilst they see the pressures of feral cats, they tend to often say that feral pigs are a nuisance in Northern Australia. And really, whilst DAF and others really do understand the biosecurity issues and understand that, I don't think we've brought the argument together sufficiently enough to sway Treasury at this point in time. So we've got quite a bit of work to do there. And by putting together a much more comprehensive platform of action, I think we have a larger chance of actually getting some serious funding into the process. And I know state governments and regional entities are putting money in, but it's not in a framework that's actually going to deliver a major outcome at this point in time. So part of the big argument in the move to protect our ecosystems in the face of climate change, feral pig management is an absolute must. I think outside of what Damien said, that's probably what all I have to say. But the one thing I would say, it is data hungry. So data from all the projects, if we can work with various projects about where in the landscapes pigs have been controlled, the sex, the size, and all the other factors that go to dispersal and behaviour, etc., are going to be really important to feed into this system. And by way of example, just before I finish up, when we first started the Crown of Thorns Starfish Control Program, there was a belief by the entire science community that there was an initiation box just outside of Lizard Island off Cooktown area. And that's where the Crown of Thorns started, and they moved and they marched down the Great Barrier Reef, eating the corals on their way in a big wave. We actually know that's rubbish now, and that Crown of Thorns larvae are ubiquitous right the way, and small Crown of Thorns live in the rubble right the way through the GBR, and they rise up under particular conditions. There is no way we would ever have got to that point had we not actually had the amount of data that we have now that actually shows us what it is. And it's changed our whole approach to Crown of Thorns starfish control. So whilst a lot of people know a lot about pigs, you need to put that all together to get an overarching view of what's actually going on. And often it's not exactly like we thought it was once you get the data in place. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
And just my final point is, if you want to know about the project, Justin Perry is the project leader. He'll be in charge of all the setting up of the experimental design and all the control actions and things like that. You can contact Sheriden and myself if you want to know about the bigger program and the bigger objectives, but for the specific project, contact Justin there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sheriden and Damien.